There are 77 different types of trust that exist in the United States right now. They all boil down to one of two categories, revocable and irrevocable. We're going to talk about this concept of a hierarchical ecosystem. But at the very top, we need to understand that the backbone of everything that happens in the Rockefeller Method, the backbone is this concept of a dynastic trust methodology for ownership. It's essentially leveraging a very certain type of trust methodology that lasts for multiple generations, called dynasty trusts, right? And specifically, dynasty trusts in the form of irrevocable trusts. I believe that when you're getting started, it is perfectly legitimate approach to not necessarily incorporate irrevocable trusts into your ecosystem at first, to really leverage what are called revocable trusts instead. But as you continue your wealth creation journey, you're going to get into a point in time when you're going to start to talk about irrevocable trusts. There are 77 different types of trusts that exist in the United States right now. They all boil down to one of two categories, revocable and irrevocable. The main difference between the two is the permanence, if you will, of the type of document. Can it be changed or not? Revocable trusts they're very fluid. They can be changed at any time by the person who created them. Whereas irrevocable trusts tend to be much more permanent in nature. Once they are drafted and put into full force, again, I'm a lawyer, so I never like saying never, but it is very difficult, if not nearly impossible, to change an irrevocable trust once it is put into effect. When you're looking at designing your ecosystem, you have to decide, well, what type of trust makes the most sense at the top of your infrastructure? And when we're talking about those types of trusts, those are private documents, which are agreements that you essentially create between yourself as the grantor and whoever the trustee is going to be. In a revocable trust, it's likely you to be the trustee as well. In an irrevocable trust, it's likely to be some third-party trustee. Maybe it's another family member, maybe it's a spouse, maybe it's a friend of the family, who knows. But regardless, it's a private agreement that has a lot of different provisions in the agreement. And one of those provisions is how long does this trust document last? Now, in many states across the country, there is a rule that says trusts can't last forever. That is sometimes referred to as the rule against perpetuity. It just basically means the trust can't live forever. Dynastic provisions within a trust allow for the trust to have a multi-generational approach to it. Doesn't necessarily mean it lasts forever, but it gives the capability of creating a dynasty. And when we talk about some of the other things that we're going to talk about in this session, we'll talk about how other members of the family can get involved in creating essentially a in perpetuity type of ecosystem, even though there is this rule against perpetuities in many states. Right. So, because we can get different family members at different generations to engage in this multi-generational planning environment. When we look at irrevocable trusts themselves, again, these are much more permanent in nature. Even revocable trusts, you have to contemplate with regard to this irrevocable concept, because a revocable trust becomes irrevocable when the grantor passes away. So if you created a revocable trust today and you die, that trust becomes irrevocable at that point because it can no longer be changed. The grantor who created it is no longer alive, and only the grantor who created it can change it. So irrevocable trusts as a concept, if your goal is generational wealth creation, irrevocable trust as a concept needs to be considered. But in addition to that, what we also need to understand is there are things that are looking to attack your wealth. One of the things that is part and parcel to that wealth attack is this concept of taxation, right? So as you're building wealth during your lifetime, that wealth creation approach is bombarded by income taxes, right? It could also be bombarded with capital gains taxes. It could be bombarded with property taxes. It could be bombarded with estate taxes. right? All of these things are part and parcel to the erosion of the wealth that you're working hard to create. So what we may wish to do is to incorporate different types of entities into our mix that give us the ability to reduce our exposure to that erosion, reduce the impact, if you will, of taxation on the wealth that we're creating. Now, there are certain things that can be done that reduce your income tax burden. That comes down to different types of tax reduction strategies. I was on the phone with some business owners earlier today, and we were talking about different strategies that they're going to be leveraging between now and year end that are going to result in about 5 figures of in-the-pocket tax savings. If you're generating $7 to $10 million a year, 5 figures of tax savings may not be the thing that wakes you up and says, wow, I need to pay attention. But if you're in the couple $100,000 range, a 5-figure tax savings is nothing to shake a stick at, right? And now, don't get me wrong, I think anyone, if they saw 5 figures of dollars sitting on the floor while they're walking, they're gonna pick it up, right? So the concept of tax reduction is how can you just hold on to more of your own money? How can you protect that money? And we can leverage entities like family limited partners and LLCs in order to control and get tax efficiency within our operations, right? So I teach something called the Real Wealth Matrix, which is the ideal hierarchy of ownership pretty much over everything in your life. We utilize trusts and holding companies and operating companies. We leverage family management companies and special purpose entities and beneficial operating companies. There's a variety of different entity types we leverage, but the objective is multifold. We want to keep more of every dollar that gets made. We want to protect those dollars from all the enemies at the gate, the creditors, the litigants, the opportunists who want a piece of your pie. We want to make sure that we give those dollars a job, right, to go out and find friends, bring more dollars home, right? And then ultimately, we want to ensure that the true beneficiaries of what you build, well, they're the people and the causes that you care about, not the government. In order to do that, we need to understand that in order to get some of these benefits, we need to separate ownership and control, right? So this concept of operations versus ownership is important to me. So you can have an ownership position in something, and you can have a control position in something, and then you could separate that entirely from where you're operating. And why is that important? Well, there's a variety of different types of liability that exist for business owners. 2 main types, like if you really were to categorize everything into basic types, there's 2 main types of liability we have to be concerned with. One is inside out liability. That's the liability that occurs inside of a business ecosystem or inside of something that you own, right? So if we're talking about a business, it's like a slip and fall in the business. If you were talking about real estate, it could be a slip and fall inside of the property, right? That's a risk event that occurs inside of where your wealth is being created, right? Now, we traditionally protect and safeguard that by the use of an LLC as an example, a force field around that business asset. And that helps to prevent the harmed party from reaching through the business to get to your other stuff, right? But again, there's a lot of nuance in doing this the right way. And that's why in our ecosystem, my mentees, we spend a year together in order to help them make sure they're operating their businesses the right way. Because it's not just enough to have an LLC. That's just a piece of paper. It's pretty much worth a piece of paper's worth, right? It's what you do with the piece of paper, how you do actually operate your business that gives you the safeguards that are part of the LLC statutes in your respective state. But the other thing we have to be concerned about is this concept of outside-in liability. This is when you're outside in the ecosystem, the world that exists, and you're just living your life and you potentially cause harm to someone. Can they reach into your business and take your business's assets, or worse yet, take your business? That's the outside-in liability protection. We really safeguard that by having a hierarchical ownership structure, right? We leverage the concepts of holding companies and operating companies on purpose. Why? Because we can leverage a holding company in a very asset protection friendly state, like let's say Wyoming as an example. And the operating company could be situated in any other state, even if it's not necessarily an asset protection friendly state. but that's where the operations are taking place. So we form the operating company in that respective state. What we know to be true is that litigation occurs where commerce takes place, right? Because that's where you're exposed to the public. Commerce is the buying and or selling of goods and or services with the public. So an operating company, we safeguard that and separate it from all of the other wealth that you have. The worst situation is that is what you lose. You don't lose everything else. But if the worth, the actual value, is owned by the holding company above it, well, that's not engaging in commerce. So that's unlikely to get sued. Now, it doesn't mean it won't get sued, because this is the United States and anyone can sue anyone for any reason they want, right? But the reality is, will it stand the test of that litigation process? And in many regards, it would not, right? Because the holding company is not engaging with the public, right? It's not the harming party. So there wouldn't necessarily be grounds. And again, I'm a lawyer. I specialize in tax, estate, and business law, and I don't want to get too deep into the legalese here. But having a separation, that gives us significant value, right? And the reason why we want to really focus on structure over strategy is because if you have the right structure in place, the strategy falls in line. Right? The strategy falls in line. It becomes self-evident as long as you're working with individuals who understand the rules of the game. Right? There are a lot of rules to the game of business and the rules of the game of wealth creation and preservation. But once you learn those rules, the strategies become self-evident given the infrastructure that is being leveraged. If you got value from this video, go ahead and click that like button. And if you want to be informed of new videos that could help take your life and your business to the next level, be sure to subscribe and click the notification bell.